You see? Now we begin with prehistoric. Long before Stonehenge, the stones I showed you last week, long before Stonehenge was erected, was built, between 2200 and 1300 BC. Remember that in BC we count down to 0, and then 80 we start counting to 2025, the year we're in. Many areas of what is now England were occupied by roving groups. Rove is to move from place to place. It's like Land Rover. Land Rover is a car that roves, goes everywhere, mountains. England, yes, many areas of what is now England were occupied by roving groups of hunters who lived on the wild animals they could trap and kill. To trap is to set something, and animals come and fall into it, or something that catches on the legs of the animal is called a trap. The fish they could catch in the rivers, or the wild plants they could pick. There is a period in civilization which also happened in England, which is a period of hunters-gatherers. When we started as human beings, we did not know much about agriculture, and we did not grow food. We lived, our ancestors, overall, humanity, and England is very exceptional. People lived out of what they could fish, hunt, or they could gather and pick from trees and gather on the ground. And as I said, England was no exception. As I said to you, this course I'm doing is not only about, sometimes it's learning English and also learning about civilization, about literature and later. They grew no crops and had no livestock. Livestock is all the animals, but today people can grow in a farm. Hens, chickens, cows, sheep, whatever. All this together is called livestock. Then about 4000 BC, these Stone Age hunters were joined by other people, immigrants from the continent, small men and women who crossed the sea in little skin boats, bringing with them a different way of life. You have to understand that though the English today, they think of themselves as one people, English, more or less pure, white, fair, like fair hair, tall. England saw a huge succession of people coming, especially in early times, because the sea, what is now a sea between Europe and England, froze over in the winter. And at sometimes in very cold ages at the beginning, it was covered with ice all the time. So people could move. What is today Asia and Europe could for a long time be one piece of land. The sea freezes over and people can travel on it like they do today on the boats where we have ice all the time. These new people, they made clearings in the forests for their animals, grew crops, made axes and other tools from flint. They made pottery and established meeting places and tribal centers. They developed the custom of burying their dead in stone tombs. The things I mentioned here are actually big steps in civilization. Humans began as hunters-gatherers, and then they learned a very, very clever thing, which is why wait for things to happen and why not grow them? And it is in this way that two things happen, which is agriculture and growing animals for use, either as meat or help in the work of the farm. These two things are very, very important steps in human civilization in general, and in the English civilization as well, as we talk about. When people were hunters-gatherers, they depended really on the place they were in, on what they could pick. But they became more secure when they learned to grow things, and also to rear animals and use them when they So they made clearings in the forests for their animals, grew crops, that's agriculture, made axes and other tools from flint, from stone. Because we have, as I was saying last week, we have three ages when we talk about civilization. We talk about the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. Stone Age becomes first because it is the age in which people learn to make tools out of stone. Not any stone, it's called flint stone, it's a special kind of stone. And then the flint stone, if you read it together, it gives you sparkles, and this is how the discovery of fire happened as well. But in the Stone Age, tools, whether weapons or tools for work, are made from stone. In the Bronze Age, they were from bronze, and in the Iron Age, tools and weapons are made from iron. They baked pottery. Pottery is very important. It's probably one of the very first industries they could. It's really like early men, changing something into something else. You take clay, you mix it with water, you knead it, and then make a pot or some utensil out of it. And then, if you leave it like that, it's not strong enough. You bake it. You put it in fire for some time. And then your ground becomes a great ground. You this true. Machine is still the same thing. We have to invent all the other methods around. But still, your orchestra in machine made by your grandmother is in the bakery. So this again, making pottery is a very important step. Because it's like the beginning of man changing his environment. From clay, mixed with wood, even better, pottery will be one of the early things on which man will practice art. And again, art for decoration is a huge step in the development of humanity. Because it's like you make a pot to boil water in it or to eat it in it, but you really don't need to decorate it. But somehow earlier began to decorate it, which means man begins to develop this artistic attitude to beauty. And again, pottery is very important. Today in archaeology, when people are digging old places, pottery is very important. The way it is made tells you, gives you an idea about its time. And also the inscriptions on it give you an idea of where it belongs, where it would have come from. Because if you find a piece of pottery in Greece, it is possible that it was not made in Greece. It was made somewhere else than Greece. When archaeologists study pottery in laboratories and the microscopes, they can tell where it was made, how it was made, and if there are inscriptions on it, they can even tell what people made it. And in this way, they could establish connections. For example, if you go to Greece, I was talking the other day about connections between Greece and Egypt. If you go to Greece and dig up some place and find pottery which you can link to Egypt, historically, archaeologically, we have proof that there was contact. Something which was made in Egypt was found, even if in broken bits, in Greece. And this is why pottery is important. They made pottery and established meeting places and tribal centers. Meeting places like Stonehenge, where the whole community would come together, and tribal places which is the beginning of settlement. It's the beginning of people stopping roving around and becoming attached to particular places. And this is again an important step in civilization. When man stops moving around and begins to build his own environment, clearing ground for his animals, to do crops, especially wheat coming. It came out of very wild oats that grew widely in the forest. It's through a lot of work that it becomes the wheat we have today, which we can eat. They developed the custom of burying their dead in stone tombs. Now, tomb, but tomb in Constantine one. I say tomb because I come from somewhere else. Tomb, there's a B, but it's not pronounced. Tomb. It's funny, but it's sad. Again, burying the dead is an important step in civilization. Very, very few animals bury their dead. In fact, some scholars think that burying the dead is one characteristic of human beings. In the 4th or 5th year, we will study a great poet called T.S. Eliot. And T.S. Eliot has a great poem called The Wasteland of Al-Qur'an. And the first part of that poem is called The Burial of the Dead. Definitely remote. Because in literature in general, leaving your dead in open ground for birds of prey and wild animals is the most shameful thing you can do. So, if you want to punish somebody by death and punish him after death, is leave his body out of the ground. Anyway, well, that's something we should have to wait. 4 years is a long time. More immigrants followed, coming from present-day Holland and northern Germany, bringing with them a knowledge of working in bronze. It's slightly moving now into the Bronze Age, and more people are coming into England. And the reason England is Germanic, Anglo-Saxon, it's because most of the people came from what is today Germany, Belgium, Holland, the north of France. Even in Roman times, these areas will stay independent and will continue. People from there will continue going to England. That is what gives England today and Britain its Anglo-Saxon nature. We refer to the English and the Scottish and the Irish as Anglo-Saxon because most of them came from Northern Europe. They arrived towards the beginning of the early Bronze Age in about 2000 BC. Roughly, to keep an idea about Bronze Age, Iron Age, and Stone Age in your head is to think before 2000 BC, it's Stone Age. From 2000 to 1000, roughly, this is approximately. The 1000 years from 2000 to 1000 are Bronze Age. And after that, from 1000 to 1100 till after, it's the Stone Age. The Iron Age. So basically, sometimes in my text you find references to stone, bronze, iron ages. It's a bit like this. In your head, it should be like this. It was they who were responsible for bringing immense stones from South Wales for the second stage of the building of Stonehenge. Now, Stonehenge, I showed you, was actually built 3 times. If you're interested in Stonehenge, go to the internet and read about it. There were already stones there for a long time, and then these people who emigrated from the north of France and Germany and Holland and Belgium, they decided to add 2 stones in place, and it is them who brought the big stones from what is today Wales, which is to the west of England. And then Stonehenge will be rebuilt the 3rd time later, and I hope we will have some. Other smaller waves of immigrants followed, but the population of the island remained small and its settlements widely scattered until in about 1600 BC, more and more people appeared, more and more settlements were built on the hills, agricultural land was laid out in large field systems surrounded by groups of huts. Of course, we're running very quickly. More and more people coming to England, more development. But England in the beginning was like common land. The people who emigrated, they seem to have lived in peace with the people they found on the spot. It's not like when European settlers go to America. One, the land was large, and the people were few. So when new immigrants came, they found places to settle. Not necessarily by removing earlier people from their places. And they moved in what you could call today clans or tribes. So they worked the land together. They would have a big piece of land, and each family would have a small plot to work for itself. This is when humanity was socialist before it becomes capitalist. People also learn the benefits of staying in one place together for security, for having each other, for their social and religious practices. It's better to live like in a compound, separate houses, but in the same place. And this is how we have the ancestors of villages, and that's towns, and big cities, what you have. By 1500 BC, the population rose to about 1 million. In those days, 1 million. Today, in any nation, we have 600, 700 people, 700,000. At this time, the whole of England counted some 1 million. Then, towards the end of the Bronze Age, which is about 1100 or 1000 BC, yet other immigrants arrived, bringing with them new skills and ornaments, which were to be collectively known as the Wessex Southern England culture. As I said, England is a succession over centuries, a succession of many people, but most of them coming from Europe. And that's why, in general, Britain retains the Anglo-Saxon character. There were people moving from Asia. In fact, some of the people who moved to they did not actually do it willingly. They were pressured by people coming from Asia. So when people come from Asia, people in Europe are under pressure, so they move to England. Now, people from Asia sometimes they stayed, but most of the time they came and went back. Even in later times, in Roman times, you probably heard of Attila the Hun, many times. Huge, it's like Tatar on the whole. It's Asian sometimes. When they decide to move, they just move. But basically, most of the time they don't stay. They go into lands, huge lands. They take whatever they can, and then slowly trickle back and go back to where they came from. These newcomers were traders as well as craftsmen. Again, we're moving in terms of sophistication, in terms of development. We started from gatherer hunters, and then people settling down, a little bit of agriculture, a little bit of pottery, and making tools, and now we're moving to things becoming more sophisticated, more developed. These newcomers were traders as well as craftsmen, builders, as well as, when necessary, warriors. The idea of war continues to come into play, because when more and more people come, there is less and less space. People want the good spaces, which probably other people occupied, and here they have to move them, and this means conflict, and this is how war comes into dismantled the circle of stones erected by their predecessors and replaced them with 80 immense blocks of stone, square and dressed with their shaped lintels in the circle and horseshoe of tri-lintels, which still stand today. What does this mean? This is the third time, as I said to you, when Stonehenge will be rebuilt in the shape I showed you last week, i.e. the big stone standing in the track. Lintels, the big stones on top of them. And see, in the earlier Stonehenge, the stones were there, but they were not, like dressed in a particular shape. When these people came, they removed them and they gave Stonehenge the structure that it has today. And this says Stonehenge is a mysterious, like the Germans. There is some geometry, there is architecture, there is some relationship with the sun, with the moon. Lots of hints that the stones were organized in that way, like the pyramids were built in that way, according to some beliefs, some ideas. It's like with the pyramids. There are many theories about what Stonehenge was built for, how it was built. Because when you look at the size of the stones, they're really huge. And when you look at the means that people had to move some of the stones and to erect them. Can you imagine? A stone that's probably as big as from here to the wall, but many meters in, and many tons in weight. And then small people managing to erect their stones, and even better, to put another big stone on top of that. How did they do that? Again, if you want to learn about that, you can always do. So, the lintels are the stones that are put onto erected stone. It's like to make an entrance. In French it's lenteau. Un lenteau, c'est la pièce qu'on met au sommet de la porte. You have two walls, and then you put a lenteau, which is either of wood or concrete, so that you finish your wall on top of the door. That's a lintel in English. In the circle and horseshoe. Horseshoe is a circle that's not finished. A bit like, you know what a horseshoe is? It's this the metal shoe that you put underneath the hoof of the horse. Diverse as the people in the island already were, their stock was to become more varied still when in about 800 BC, at the beginning of the Iron Age, other settlers arrived from the continent. At first in small groups, then in larger groups. Again, waves and waves of immigrants into England. These were the Celts. It's a C, but we pronounce it K. But there are people who say Celts. I mentioned the other day one of the big clubs in Glasgow in Scotland. It's called Celtic. Celtic in honor of these Celts. Some people say Celtic. A taller, fairer race than the people who had come before, members of tribes which had long been settled in present-day France, Belgium, and southern Germany, and which were now moving west, retreating from more warlike tribes harassing them from the east. This is what I was saying earlier. The they moved, but forcibly, because they themselves were invaded by people coming from Asia, from the East. They could not face up to them, so they simply decided to move and find some other place. And they go to England. Now, Celts are one of today they are considered as one of the original people in Britain. They built fortified hill forts with turf and stone ramparts. We begin, the place is becoming a bit small. So people begin thinking of living together in fortified places. Because now, war will become part of the scene. You're fine, you're living in a place until somebody comes with more power and pushes you out. So we need to defend yourself. And obviously the Celts, who were chased from Europe by people coming from the East, when they went to England, they kept that in mind and said, well, if we have to stay here and not be moved again, then we have to do something about the way we live. And they decide to do, let me see, there are some pictures. When you look at the map here, Wales is next slide. Yes. Can you see the maps there? Wales is this place here. And it's mountains. In fact, England is more or less flat. We have some mountains here. We have Midlands slightly higher here. When you go to Scotland here, you begin to go higher up. But really, there are no high mountains in Britain as a whole. The land can be sloped, you can have small mountains, but in fact, in later stages, Celts themselves will be obliged to move into Wales, into the mountains area, to actually escape from other invading people, especially from Scandinavia, from what is today Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. A lot of the English people today have ancestors, Scandinavian ancestors, because later on, 80 after Christ, more and more people will come from Scandinavia into the Britain of today. You see, this is a hill fort. These are the ditches. Usually it's a big slope like that. In those days, if your horse went into there, it might not be able to come out. And even if a person went into that slope, he will find it very difficult to come up. And as the person does that, he is attacked by the defenders in the place. Sometimes the ditches, the fossils, the ditches were empty, but they were very deep, which means you could not jump them. And if you went into them, you have first to think of how to come out. And sometimes they were filled with water, which makes it even more difficult. Now these are some of the tools made of flint. You have a piece of stone, which they hit with another piece like that until they make it as sharp as they can. And then they tie it to a handle and use it as a tool. Now this is an early example of a hill fort, which means you take a high place, you build on top of it, and then in this one you have two ditches. You have the first one, which means if you manage to get through here, there's still another one to get through there to get to the people you want to attract. And then these are the ancestors of fortresses. In the second example, instead of a ditch, you have a wall. And this is how fortresses begin to be built. Instead of digging a ditch, which the enemy can deal with, why not build a wall and make it as high as possible? And that offers obviously better protection. I want you to keep this map of England in your head. Okay? England, this is England all the way up to here. This is Wales. You can see there. Now this is Wales. This is Southern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, which is an independent state. And this is Northern Ireland. It was part of Ireland for a long time. And even when the Reformation came, the north became Protestant, but the south remained Catholic. And the whole thing used to be a British colony. When the Irish fought for their independence in 1922 and became independent, unfortunately, there are six wilayah in the north who decided to remain with England because they were Protestant. And the rest of Ireland was Catholic. And it will give you a huge conflict, which was solved only in the last 20 years. The British Royal the IRA, Sinn Féin, the bombings in London in many places. It was because of that. The Catholics want to make Northern Ireland Catholic and take it back into Ireland, and the others, the Protestants. It's not only Protestants, but there is a slight majority of Protestants in Northern Ireland. There are Catholics there, and the Catholics want to go back to Ireland. The Protestants want to remain with Britain, and this is what gave you that conflict. And luckily, it was solved in very recent times. So doubtless as the people in the island already were, their stock was to become more varied still when in about 800 BC, at the beginning of the Iron Age, other settlers arrived from the continent. At first, it's what I understand. Yes, they built 45 hill forts, the hill to the high ground, didn't they? With turf and stone ramparts protection. From such forts as these and from other strongholds protected by water rather than ramparts, Celtic or Celtic tribesmen raided nearby settlements and carried off prisoners as slaves. Unfortunately, the Celts would bring war to an otherwise peaceful Britain before. They were themselves pushed out of Europe by force. When they go to Britain, they take that mentality with them, and the Celts are warriors. They have to do war. You can build a society by work, farming, and you can build it by war, which means you take from other people what they have and use it for yourself. And unfortunately, the Celts were against that. Mind you, the rest of the world. But the Celts were not only warriors, they were practiced farmers, dividing the land into square fields, separated by banks, and working the earth with small plows. Now the plow is very important. the cloud behind. There's a secret to agriculture, and agriculture is the secret to the growth of the human civilization. Even to this day, agriculture and developments in agriculture are very important. The earth would not have been able to sustain 8 billion people without advances in agriculture. And the cloud is a major advance in agriculture. Because in the beginning, people were digging the ground with tools to sow whatever crop. Now the cloud, drawn by oxen, or by horses, or by mules, goes deeper in the ground. You do more plowing, obviously, and you produce more. If you produce more, you can grow and have kids. You would not die of famine. Another important step which will happen later is when the cloud becomes metallic. When the end of the cloud which goes into the ground is made of hard wood, pointed like that, to actually open up the ground. When that is replaced with iron, the cloud becomes more efficient, goes deeper in the ground, and gives you better crops. When you have better crops, you become more prosperous, and you begin to have time for other things, like art and literature and that sort of thing. But the Celts were not only warriors, they were practiced farmers, dividing the land into square fields, separated by dikes, and working the earth with small plows drawn by oxen. And ox is the name of the cow. Here. They grew oats and rye. Oats and rye are a kind of wild grain. It is from them that we have the more sophisticated wheat and barley, and after many tens of years of work. They grew oats and rye, wheat and barley, corn, maize, corn was ground in hand mills. Hand mills in the middle, which we know in our own culture. And the alcoholic drink, known as mead, was made from water and fermented honey. They lived in round huts of wood and clay, covered bottom, with thatched roofs. I go back to the pictures. Now this is a thatched roof. Before the invention of tiles or metallic sheets that we used today, all sorts. No. The only way you could cover your hut was with branches and leaves on trees, and thatch geese in Arabic, which is like long straws growing by rivers, and they can grow very long, and they're very hard. If you take these and put it like that, you will injure yourself. There is a saying in Arabic. يقولوا فلان كي ديس كم تحبش بالله تخفي الدماغ يمشي 7 كيلو. This is said of people who when they are in the Christmas they're very meek, but give them just a little chance and they blow up and become very dangerous. But that's on the side. This is the thatched roof. These straws, if you put a lot of them, in a circle like this, and a lot of them on top of each other, and you tap them, they actually manage to keep water out. Because water doesn't have time to go through all of them. It has more time to go like that. It's like tiles. When you look at tiles, there are lots of spaces. You can see light. But the reason tiles do not let water in is because they're like that. And they're on top of each other. So this pours water on top of this. And so on. And they also overlap on the side. Even though they are not waterproof, because you can see light through them, but because they overlap like that, and they are sloped like that, if you pour water on them, water does not have time to go into, it has more time to actually run up and go. And this is what the early huts were made of this, which means you take branches, slightly thicker, you put them like the one standing here, and then you weave smaller branches in between them. At the end you have something like a carpet like this, and then you put mud over it. You mix mud with little twigs, and then you go with the mud on both sides. In that way you have a good wall, not very good of course for the weather in Britain, but still wood which keeps wind and cold away. So we have clay covered wattle. These carpets made out of twigs, branches, and then with mud over them, we use them as walls. And we have thatch for the roof. Thatch roofs made of straw and vegetation. Both men and women wore brightly colored clothes, red being a favorite color. That's why red will always remain a favorite color in Britain. It's on the flag of England. They had shoes and sandals of leather, and those who could afford them wore is the past of wear. Finally crafted ornaments and jewels, brooches, the brush, bracelets, necklaces, rings, both local and imported. These are important items because when a community has these things, it means it's prosperous. When a community can afford rings and bracelets made of more or less expensive metals, it means the level of achievement of this community. It means this community is not going hungry. This community is prosperous. It's producing enough to sell to other people, because sometimes some of these ornaments are imported, which means people, either in agriculture or growing animals or whatever, have made a lot of money in order to get these things from abroad and wear them. They exported hides, skins, hides and slaves. Remember, cats, like. Sorry.
الله 10 سنين مدة.
need to get some.
شكون اللي قال؟ شكون اللي قال؟
So they exported hides and slaves, cattle, animals, dogs and minerals, tin, iron, as well as gold and silver. The Celts achieved an interesting level of civilization. Among the most illustrious, the hard working of the Celtic tribes were one particular tribe called the Belgae. Among the most industrious of the Celtic tribes were the Belgae, who immigrated to Britain from France towards the beginning of the 1st century BC. We're coming down in time. Okay. We started around 2000. Now we are in the 1st century BC. They settled at first in the southeast, where they soon became the dominant people in the area, and as their coinage